Before Donald Trump became a real estate mogul, reality TV star, and the 45th President of the United States, he was involved in a high-profile legal case alongside his father, Fred Trump. In the early 1970s, the Trump family's real estate company, Trump Management, was accused by the US government of systematically discriminating against Black and Puerto Rican applicants seeking apartments in their New York City buildings. Welcome back to Crime Chronicles. Stay tuned as we look at this case, which became one of Donald Trump's first major legal battles, set the tone for his controversial career, and was an early indication of his confrontational legal strategy. Fred Trump had been a successful real estate developer in Brooklyn and Queens for decades, constructing thousands of middle-class apartments, many of which were built with federal subsidies. By the 1960s and early 1970s, the Trump business was thriving, and Donald Trump had recently joined his father in managing the company, eager to expand their influence into Manhattan and beyond. However, their success was marred by allegations that their buildings were not welcoming to minority tenants. Complaints began surfacing that Black and Puerto Rican applicants were systematically denied apartments, even when they met the financial qualifications. The issue caught the attention of activists and eventually the federal government. The case began in 1973 when the US Department of Justice launched an investigation into the rental practices of Trump Management. The investigation was part of a broader crackdown on housing discrimination, led by the newly enacted Fair Housing Act of 1968. The act prohibited landlords from discriminating based on race, but enforcement was still evolving, and many landlords continued to find ways to exclude minority tenants. Undercover investigators and civil rights organizations had gathered evidence that Black applicants were turned away from Trump buildings, while white applicants with similar financial backgrounds were offered leases. Some of the key findings included the following. Black applicants were told no apartments were available, only for white applicants to be offered the same units shortly thereafter. Housing applications from Black applicants were marked with coded symbols, such as C for colored, signaling that they should not be approved. Employees were allegedly instructed to steer Black renters away from Trump properties. The Department of Justice concluded that Trump Management had engaged in a pattern of racial discrimination, violating the Fair Housing Act. In October of 1973, the federal government formally filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump, Fred Trump, and their company. Rather than quietly settling the case, the Trumps fought back aggressively. Donald Trump hired the infamous lawyer Roy Cohn, known for his aggressive and ruthless tactics, to defend them. Cohn, who had been a chief aide to Senator Joseph McCarthy during the anti-communist hearings of the 1950s, advised Trump to countersue the federal government for $100 million, accusing them of defamation and bias. Trump and Cohn framed the case as politically motivated attack, arguing that the government was unfairly targeting a successful real estate business. Trump also denied that his company had engaged in discrimination, stating that they had simply been selective in choosing the best tenants. The case dragged on for 2 years, with both sides presenting evidence and arguments. The Department of Justice brought forth numerous testimonies from rejected Black applicants, while Trump Management denied any wrongdoing. Cohn used a strategy of delay and counterattacks, attempting to exhaust the government's resources. The Trumps argued that any rejections were due to financial concerns, not race. However, the government had obtained internal records and witness statements that suggested otherwise. Despite Trump's aggressive legal tactics, the case did not go in his favor, and in 1975, the Trumps ultimately settled with the Department of Justice. Under the settlement, Trump Management did not admit to any wrongdoing, but agreed to, number one, change their rental policies. They were required to offer apartments to Black applicants and take active steps to comply with the Fair Housing Act. Number two, advertise rental openings in newspapers that had large black readerships. And number 3, submit compliance reports to the federal government to prove they were no longer engaging in discriminatory practices. However, just a few years later, reports emerged that Trump management was not fully complying with the agreement. Civil rights groups continued to monitor the company, and further complaints were filed in the late 1970s. Although this was not a criminal case, meaning no one went to prison, it was one of the first legal battles that put Donald Trump in the national spotlight. He emerged from it with a reputation for fighting lawsuits aggressively and rarely admitting fault, a pattern that would continue throughout his career. Trump would later downplay the case, claiming that the government had no strong evidence and that he settled simply to avoid the cost of prolonged litigation. He also used the experience to bolster his image as a businessman, willing to fight back against the system, a theme he carried into his political career. The Trump housing discrimination case remains a critical part of his early history, as it showcased his approach to legal and business challenges. It also highlighted systemic racism in the real estate industry and the difficulties in enforcing fair housing laws. As Trump later pursued a career in politics, his past legal battles, including this case, were frequently cited by critics as evidence of discriminatory practices. Despite this, Trump remained defiant, often dismissing the case as overblown and politically motivated. The 1973 housing discrimination case against Donald Trump and his father was a defining moment in his early career. While he avoided admitting fault, the lawsuit demonstrated how Trump handled legal disputes, with aggression, counterattacks, and strategic settlements. The case also underscored the persistent issue of racial discrimination in housing, an issue that remains relevant today. For Donald Trump, the lessons he learned from this case would shape his future approach to legal battles, politics, and public relations, reinforcing his preference for confrontation over concession. This case likely influenced Trump's future legal strategies, cementing a pattern of aggressively defending his actions and opting for settlements rather than prolonged court battles. Trump's approach to legal matters in later years would often involve strong resistance, with a preference for media spin, counterclaims, and negotiating settlements to avoid costly, drawn-out trials. His strategy in handling legal cases often included mounting a public defense, using his brand and media presence to shape public opinion, and pursuing settlements to minimize reputational damage. This early legal encounter demonstrated the value Trump placed on protecting his financial interests and personal reputation, setting a precedent for how he would navigate subsequent legal challenges throughout his career. As we have also seen, backing up all of Donald Trump's bluster and bravado is a healthy dose of straight-up lies. Maybe if he had been properly held to account during those early years, America may have been spared the onslaught of the Trump presidencies. Thank you for joining us today on Crime Chronicles. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel with your friends.